Hello, everybody, and welcome back to CLCI Live. Before we begin, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment on our videos. Interact with us, ask us questions. We'll be happy to answer them. We took a little break last week, I think, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
In the intermediate period. So we didn't really share what our topic of the month is. We went over some coaching tools last time. That was fun. But this month, we are talking clients 101.
Nice.
What about clients? Like the type of client that we're going to be interacting possibly in our coaching careers?
That is one. Yes. I think a lot of this will be about types of clients. Yes.
Or just general maybe attitudes or personality types that you might run into that might be a little challenging. So for example, we might look at skeptical clients or indecisive clients or clients who are very demanding or VIP clients, things like that.
VIP. Wow. What are VIP clients?
Like the president of a company. Those kind of VIP clients. But today, we're going to narrow our focus towards unrealistic clients.
I like it.
Yeah.
What is an unrealistic client? Yeah,
What?
that's my question. And is that a judgment?
Yes, and it's a judgment that you should be making as a coach.
So it's not me saying I want the perfect client who is going to do everything they're supposed to do.
No, that's an unrealistic coach.
Oh,
That's you being unrealistic about your clients. What we're talking about is clients who have unrealistic or exaggerated or hyperbolic or really out there expectations that are not realistic or aligned with reality.
who judges that?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Both you and the client. If you've got, obviously we probably should not be judging as coaches, but if you've got a client who says, I want to make it to Mars within the next 6 months or so, maybe rethink the coach-client relationship.
I'm gonna ask
No,
you.
absolutely not. That's coachable. I would coach on that.
How are you going to
Because
do that?
Is that a realistic, attainable goal to get to Mars
Well, how do you,
planet within 6
how do
months?
you find get to Mars? Like physically get to Mars, or do you mean like
physically land on Mars on your 2 feet
I would
within
dig
6 months?
what is beneath that. What are they actually seeking? What is that going to do for them? What's the difference that will make for them? That's what they want.
Okay.
That's what I think.
So we're talking outcome versus goal.
Right. So the goal could be unrealistic, but the outcome could be achievable.
So when this concept of unrealistic, yes, it does reek of judgment. It absolutely does. I think that when we're talking about client goals, it's one thing. But there are other areas that clients can be unrealistic as well, which we'll touch on. But just throwing that out there for now, though. Anthony, what were you saying?
Oh, I was about to say, can I also explain why that is an unrealistic goal that maybe the coach should question? Currently, it's estimated it'll take 14 months to reach Mars with current spaceship technology, depending on where you are, where Mars' position is. So even by NASA standards, 6 months is kind of an unrealistic goal to get to Mars in 6 months starting now. What I am literally trying to tell you guys is there are some goals that just cannot be attained within a given time frame. And I know we're like bending over backwards to be like, well, what do they really? I'm telling you, this person wants something that cannot happen in physical reality. What do you do with that as a coach?
You don't squash the dream.
Wait,
I think-
didn't catch that. What was that, Lisa?
I said you don't squash the dream.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Why not?
well, do you want to be responsible for squashing someone's dream? I don't.
Sure.
You're full of malarkey.
Well, there are different ways to squash a dream, as there are many different ways to skin a cat.
Wait a second, Anthony. So I think though, like really what we're going to do if we start working with that client, we're working with, you know, the reasons why, the ins, the outs, those things. And then on top of that, the client's going to start to do research and they're going to figure out on their own. It's going to take at least 14 months. So maybe that first session, they may not have that piece of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know who this client is and who their connections are and what's possible and all of these things. I mean, yes, they might end up dying in space on the way there or what have you. But that's not our fault or our business. We can talk them through this process.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to figure that stuff out on their own along the way, right? So,
Right.
So is it then the job of the coach to help them realize that some goals are not attainable within their defined parameters?
I think that we have to, it's that partnering with them, right? Like, so I think we don't help them is a dangerous word because we're not going to like pull open the computer and Google, hey, how long does it take to go to Mars with them? Like that's work they're going to have to do on their own. So what we're going to help them do is create the plan to figure out what it takes to get to Mars. If that goal is really in alignment, why they want to do it, connect to it emotionally, and they're going to learn along the way. And we can be there to learn with them along the way as well. We have to be careful not to decide because that's a very obvious unrealistic time frame for a goal. I mean, it's unrealistic in general because no human being has set foot on Mars yet. So it's just going to be, you're going to be very special, but that doesn't mean that it's not, you know, it can't happen, right? We can't poo-poo that because if we take something that is maybe more in the bounds of reality, you know, maybe it's, I mean, I'll just go really micro with this. Maybe it's that I want to do my laundry, right? Okay, it's a goal. We can all wrap our heads around it. It can seem really realistic and easy to do for all of us, hopefully. But at the same time, there might be a whole bunch of things in the way that make it a lot harder and more unrealistic. Or if we take somebody, I mean, that's a very normal and achievable goal, but something that we might determine to be unrealistic that is very possible. We used to give an example of a guy that wanted to be a basketball player, and he's a very short guy. And I don't know his name because I'm not a sports person. But he had basically been told his whole life, you know, you're never going to be a basketball player, you're too short. And he ended up becoming this huge, famous professional basketball player.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of his name. It's my story that I always tell, and I cannot think of his name.
I
Spud
don't want to say
or something.
Yeah.
There you go.
He attained fame through free throw and among other things got hired on. So yeah, you can be a short basketball player. Short 5'7", I think was the argument. Go ahead, Brooke. Go ahead with the story.
Along the way, he had been told repeatedly over and over by coaches, you know, it's not possible for you. But he proved them all wrong. So we just have to be very cautious with what we think, with what judgments we bring in to that session in regards to that. And that's when we're talking about being unrealistic in the space of clients setting goals and the time periods they set them in. I do think there might be moments where we go, oh man, they are setting a really tight goal for themselves, and that is going to be wild if it happens. And I think it's important for us as coaches to be ready to assist our clients in the moments when they don't get to that reality, right? When it's not happening, when they're not going to hit the deadlines they've laid out for themselves unrealistically.
I think sometimes coaches, life coaches, us, not basketball coaches, I think some coaches get worried that we're not helping enough in that moment and feel like we have to help them get grounded and be in whatever reality we think is reality. And the idea is sometimes we know a lot. I throw around another concept is if you're let's say a nutrition coach. And then I say, in 3 weeks, I'd like to lose 20 pounds. Well, some will say that's just not realistic. That's unhealthy. That's blah, 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 blah.
My face went, no.
Before you find out even what my concept around it is, or what my go-to reason is, or how I intend to do it, that life preserver is thrown out immediately before finding out those details. And then, letting me experiment and see what works and what doesn't work. And, typically we're meeting with our clients once a week. So next week I come in, I didn't attain the goal that I needed to accomplish that, like 9 pounds a week or some silly number. For me, I can't do that, but
I should say that healthy weight loss is defined as 1 to 2 pounds per week. That is what is considered to be healthy and sustainable weight loss. So that's my
but that's the point. You're in this space going to hear first before we throw out some concepts that client's going to share with us. We want to hear what they have to say before we correct them.
Right. So you don't just throw out, well, actually, that's totally unrealistic. That's not healthy. You explore and question in a way that kind of reveals maybe that.
Not even that necessarily. They can go experiment. Juice diets, right? You do a juice diet. And Joe Cross did it for...
Everything in me is screaming right now. This is so hard because somebody who's very much lived in this space, it's if you did lose that much weight, you're not going to keep it off. There's so many things. It's not healthy for your body. Your body is going to go into starvation mode. There's so many things that
we're getting kind of lost though in the morals of a goal of realism, or if you should.
Well, that's where. So that's what, as Lisa's explaining this, I'm screaming on the inside, and I can imagine a coach.
Yes, I would not coach on that. That's not something I would coach on, because that goes against ethically what I know to be.
Now, if it's Christian Bale coming to me and he needs to lose 20 pounds for a role, because that man is somebody who does these huge weight losses and weight gains with his body, and he is just capable of pushing his body to extremes and doing so in short amounts of time. It might be a different story, right? He's doing it for a role. Mind you, health is probably still important and ethical in that space, because we're not just supposed to not do harm, we're supposed to do better. But maybe, it would be less screaming on the inside in a situation like that. I don't know why. It's still not healthy.
I still wouldn't coach on it.
Jen's no.
But look at that. I said I would coach on the Mars mission, but I wouldn't coach on 20-pound weight loss.
With her clients getting exploded in the atmosphere, she's not okay with clients losing weight too quickly.
Really, the point is to explore with your client what they're wanting an outcome to be. What is the steps along the way? What if they fail? What if it doesn't happen? How will they proceed from there? If looking at a topic and looking under the rock, as I say, and to see what is going on, what they're sharing, what they need to think about, What are considerations? What have they looked into about health and this kind of direction? Doctors, what does the doctor say about this kind of direction for them to go? I mean, I would ask all of those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
And again, we're going to ask questions. I mean, our goal is to bring, just exploration and awareness around goals and the reason they're setting them, and then to bring them tangibly into the real world and see, so that our clients can see what it truly is and is not possible. And this is in the space of setting goals. Now, if you have a client that is continuously setting, I'm going to just, switch to something that Anthony will be happy I'm asking about. If we have a client that is continuously setting goals that are with deadlines that are way too short, and with asks that are just for them, and what we've seen it coming up as a pattern, right? A pattern of, I set a goal, I set it in too short of a time, I set the goal to be too big, and now I end up disappointed and I end up giving up, or where it becomes a cycle. And it's something that we can start to see, and an awareness, and this can happen. So this I would call like a chronically unrealistic client. We were just talking in the space of one goal, but how do we handle a client that it's almost becoming a cyclical thing, where it's a pattern. They are setting goals, they are missing goals, setting, missing, setting, missing, setting, missing. And at this point, we can identify that and make that judgment or observation as a coach. And how do we handle that? How do we deal with that?
We share that observation, and we share it from a place of non-attachment, neutrality, where we're not judging it, we're just noticing it, and then we're inquiring, what do they think about that? What is their take on that? You're just literally giving them the data and then giving them the floor. What are their thoughts? What are they making that mean? What does that mean to them? All sorts of questions that you could ask there.
I think it also could be there's kind of a fine line there too. Like, if it's that much of a pattern, and if they aren't willing to recognize it, and it keeps happening over and over and over again, and it's resulting in some kind of self-deprecation, or sort of where it becomes a negative, they have a very negative response to them being incapable of reaching these goals that they keep setting over and over and over again, in within your sessions. I think it could almost get to the point of a refer out situation, where if they're not willing to acknowledge it, and it becomes this cycle, and at that point, if they're not able to bring their own awareness to this pattern, it becomes a situation, I think, where we go, I recommend you to therapy at this point, probably. Because this feels like a trauma response or something. You know what I mean?
Even before referring out, just having that check-in moment, that check-in of, how do you feel that this is going? How do you think about the setting of goals, and then the coming to the session, and then not having achieved the goals and setting more goals? How is that working for you? Like, again, information shared, non-attachment, and then what is there?
I might even add, if you were to discuss this with your friend and you recognize that this scenario with your friend, how would you talk to them about what's going on? Because a lot of the times that self beat up mode is easy to come out in that moment. But if we're talking to other people, we don't tend to beat them up as readily as we do ourselves. So having that third person kind of concept removes them from the immediate impact and allows them to have a thought process of how they would help another person, and then they can turn it around with themselves.
I'm thinking about this question, Brooke, from like an organizational or like project-based standpoint as well. Like, if a business or an organization kept on setting goals for themselves that were unrealistic and failing to meet them, I'm not going to recommend that they just seek a therapist, but I might inquire, have you done a retrospective on why you're failing these goals? Do you think you understand the reason why these goals have failed. And this could be a number of reasons. Like if we're just taking like SMART goals, for example, it might be because we're not being specific enough in our goals, or they're not accurately time bound, where we're setting too short of an expectation, or they might just not have a great enough amount of resources to pull from to achieve these goals. I think it's probably important, if we can apply that to the person or the client, we can definitely ask them, well, why do you think this happens? And then dig deeper until, they come up with a reason that satisfies them. And then we can work. Okay, well, if you adjusted the dial, or do you want to adjust the dial on maybe your budget, your time budget, or your money budget, or making the goal more specific, or doing X, Y, and Z, do you think that would help you achieve the next goal? And then you could do this iterative process where you're just sort of adjusting knobs until maybe a goal is achieved. And maybe the goals need to be smaller. But if, there's that constant cycle of setting goals, not failing to achieve them, it might be worth asking the client, what do you think's going on? What do you think's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
There's a visual that goes along with what you're saying as well, except it's a ladder. One ladder has the rungs a whole lot closer, where the other ladder has it at a greater distance. So yeah, absolutely.
Now, what about clients who are unrealistic, maybe not in their goals, but their expectations about either themselves, other people, or like how life in general is? And I'm just reading from the Forbes list that we had.
Before we even go there, I'm going to bring it to unrealistic with expectations in coaching. Like I want to talk about the more general, but also like how other people and stuff, but I would love to bring this to a space of coaching and having clients that might come in with unrealistic expectations about coaching. So go.
The coach is going to solve my problems.
Mm-hmm. The coach is going to tell me exactly what to do to get what I want.
The coach is going to give me all kinds of advice and materials and resources and connections and yeah.
The coach is going to do all the work for me, and I'm just going to receive and succeed.
The coach is going to let me contact them in between sessions, 24 hours a day, via text. Will always be available to me whenever I want.
And I can cancel last minute too, because life is so hectic.
Here's it may be like a subtler one, that just the coaching sessions will be enough to achieve the goal or to have change. Not taking into account anything I need to do in between the coaching sessions. Just having a coaching session, that'll be enough and a worthwhile investment.
This coaching is not going to be require any personal exploration.
I got one. The coach is going to praise and cater to my feelings every time I make an inference.
The coach is not going to refer me out when I need to have therapy, not coaching.
The coach is not going to similar vein as the praise mode. The coach is not going to challenge me or
they'll just be my yes man.
What I'm doing, they're gonna just be my cheerleader.
The coach will co-sign my BS.
The coach will hold me accountable to what I say I'm going to do.
So the coach doesn't care if I no call, no show.
We're just airing our personal grievances at this point.
Care if I ghost them.
But I don't want to harp on the client too much on this, because some of these unrealistic expectations are either from pure ignorance or from other supposed quote coaches who are setting those expectations that are kind of unrealistic. As a professional who is ICF accredited or has taken ICF training, you should be able to set from the get-go what the realistic expectations is of your client, what the coaching client relationship is, and maybe have it in writing so that if there's ever a conflict, you have always something to refer to that was signed by you and the client.
I also want to
more than maybe definitely have it in writing.
Definitely. But I also want to address though, like we say that all the time. We say it very kind of flippantly. Like the solution is have it all in writing and go over it with your client. But that doesn't mean it's one and done. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have to remind your client over and over again, like that this is what you do and what you don't do, because it's going to come up all the time, because it is our nature as human beings to look to the person sitting across from us for answers and for solutions. And coaching is a different form of communication. It is not a form of communication you're going to get out there in the world with when you're talking to your friends. And so we're much more comfortable being in forms of communication that we are used to, the ones we get every day. But when you're speaking with your coach, it's a different form of communication. So your clients are going to take that moment often and pause and look to you, and then have to realize or be reminded that I'm not going to answer that question for you, or we will just turn the question back on them when they ask us a question, because that will happen. Your clients are going to ask you questions. They are going to look for praise. They're going to look for confirmation. They're going to look for all of those things that we just said. And it's not just one time, like, oh, we tell you how the coaching thing, this is going to go. We always have to gently remind them what coaching is and is not. And it's just, that's sort of a natural thing that happens, where it's going to come up more than once with your client, where they're going to think of, because that's the more normal communication than what happens in coaching. It is a new way of communicating. It really is very unique. And again, Anthony, very valid point. When we're speaking to what ICF teaches as coaching, there are definitely a lot of other.
If you don't go with an ICF accredited coach, you don't have to have any expectations. The world's your oyster.
Anything goes.
I can't tell you what happens outside of ICF coaching, because ICF coaching is the only coaching that I have ever received or given. So,
and I'm not talking about like the BCC or the National Board of Health and Wellness coaches. I'm talking about people who just wake up one day and say that they're going to coach. And try to do that.
Or people that set up a coaching school and call it, something wild, like the Harvard of coaching schools, and has no accreditation at all. And who the heck knows what they're actually teaching you? If
or
it's
the Certified Life Coach Institute of Costa Mesa,
There is a school that I heard was teaching, and it was supposed to be coaching, how to do suicide prevention.
Oh no,
that is something totally different.
Yeah,
I could see like the suicide hotline, whatever. Like maybe they sponsor it, and it's.
I could see the suicide hotline benefiting from coach training, but I don't.
I don't want coaches. To take that training to try to
replace the training that the suicide prevention people already get.
Agreed.
So we talked into unrealistic expectations of coaching. What are some maybe unrealistic expectations that people might have just in general?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a question that I use. Everybody I think in here uses at some point, and that's the question: what is in your control? And that's something that comes up like whenever you're talking to somebody and they're talking about how they think a situation is going to go, or how they think somebody is going to feel, or just all of these things that they don't have control of. So like what do you have control of in that situation? And that's a big reminder that you can't all of the other expectations are out of your control. So you have to bring it. The only expectations you can set are for yourself, but you can't set it for anything outside of that because you have no control over it, right? So I think that question is very powerful in a situation like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if the other person replied, well, other people are in my control. I can control what, like, for example, maybe you've seen this, Lisa, in your relationship coaching.
Is he manipulative? like are they?
Yes.
I don't know why I immediately assumed it was a guy too. That's shame on me for my bias right there.
But it's true. But like, I think it maybe tacitly some couples or some people in a relationship will be like, well, I can change them. I can change him. I can change her.
Heck yeah.
Is that a realistic expectation? Is it within the realm of like possibility? I think yes.
Wait.
But I would not call it realistic.
No, okay. I think you proceed with caution because I think what you meant to say was, is it a person can change, but
yeah,
I cannot physically change someone. Like I cannot. There's no way I can force somebody else to change. They have to choose to do that. The only way I can force somebody else to change is if I like physically alter them.
Well, what I'm saying, what I'm trying to get at is that, like, yes, when you enter in a relationship with someone, because of the nature of being in a relationship, you change the dynamic of that person. Mm-hmm. But you don't have control over that change necessarily. And if you try to assert that control, then you're like bordering on like, unethical stuff. But people don't often think that deep about it. They just see something they don't like in their partner and be like, well, if I'm just persistent, I can change them. I can change them to be how I want them to be or how we would like them to be. And that's not a realistic expectation to have in a relationship is what I'm getting at.
I like the question, what if you're wrong about that?
Wrong about what?
Just for a little bit of a nudge of like, are you sure that what you're saying is 100% accurate? So if you said that,
like I said, I can change them. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I would say, well, what if you're wrong about that?
Yeah. Or like what happens?
Okay.
And what if you can't? And what happens?
Or what if they don't want to change?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's like, something I see. Lisa, back to you though. How would you have, or did you address that in the coaching session?
So not in those open, just that direct. I mean, because you're pretty direct with that question. So definitely not in that direct.
And let's be honest.
Yeah.
Lisa, everybody in those couples coaching sessions was hoping to change their partner. Yeah. Every single one of them went into those sessions like, if this person could just change, I would be fine if they just changed. And there's a big learning that has to happen, right?
I mean, that's it. It's just that big learning that they're both responsible for how the relationship turns where they want it and how they want to show up in the relationship. And that's what we typically will talk into. Again, not all at once. Like, you're presenting this concept, but it doesn't happen like that because people aren't going to go, just change him. I just need him to change. They don't do that. I don't like what's happening. I don't like how it's impacting me. I don't like how the behavior's going on. I don't like, we work in that. It's not quite as fast as you said, but yes. It's the steps towards recognizing somebody wants somebody to do the work and they think they're fine. Mm-hmm. And then they realize they have to do the work too. So one person. Okay. Yeah.
So maybe another unrealistic expectation that people might have. I'm just reading from the list that we looked at from Forbes for our notes. Life should be fair. Things ought to be fair.
Oh, if they have that expectation?
Yeah. I expect and I want things to be unfair, and when unfair things happen, that's a bad thing.
I am neurodivergent, and I have those moments. Like I had one recently where like I have those moments where I have a strong sense of what I feel is right and what I feel is wrong, and like it's a physical, like I feel it physically when I feel like something is unfair or not right. Like and I have to talk myself, like I will lose sleep over these like I've lost many nights of sleep over a situation that was affecting me, that I've gotten good about, like I'm saying this now, but that's probably going to change with the current world. But I had gotten better about like, okay, I'm not trying to fix everything else around me or what have you, but what is affecting me, and that's where I'm going to bring my focus. What do I have control over? What change can I make in the space that I'm in? But I like very recently had a situation where I felt like something was not fairly handled, and I lost a lot of sleep over it. And like I had to accept that the unfairness, it had been done, and it was like that I wasn't going to be able to affect change in what had happened, but future change I was able to future situations I was able to affect by speaking up and saying something and saying, hey, I this didn't feel fair to me, and but and in that moment it wasn't like, I could just, if you want me to be more specific so I'm not so obtuse, I can. Like it's not essentially like there was a scheduling at the studio I work at. There is a way we schedule, and there's a way that classes can be covered. So if somebody gets sick or injures themselves or has to go somewhere, we put it into a system, and then the first person to respond saying they can cover gets that class, right? And that felt very fair. Like I know that if I'm busy or whatever and I don't get to it first, somebody else gets to, and it's an but we're paid for those classes. So like it affects our pocketbook if we don't get those classes, but it's a bonus. We had a teacher injure herself and she couldn't be there, and so the studio owner just thought of a quick solution, called somebody and was like, will you cover these classes? And I love teaching those particular classes, and they were at the perfect time for me to teach them, and I was so bummed that I didn't even get the chance to like throw my hat in the ring, and like it didn't feel fair to me. And so we had a whole conversation about it later, but in that moment, like I lost a lot of sleep and I didn't like it, but I just had to accept that that's how it went. Now it was a quick solution to the studio owner's problem, right? And she owns that studio. She can do that over and over and over again. And she was kind enough to listen to me and say, I want this to be more fair, and I understand that wasn't held. But there are a lot of other people that would have just told me to screw off. Like, you know what I mean? There are a lot of less willing to listen business owners that would have just said, no, this is the easiest thing for me. I don't care about your feelings. Move on. Like, you know, and so I was grateful to that, but it definitely bothered me.
Well, do you think in that particular circumstance it is unwarranted or unrealistic to either want or expect fairness in that situation?
I think that I think that there should be some level of fairness, because it could start to feel, I think it could start to feel like favoritism, and there has to be reasons, like there has to be, I think in an employment situation, because of money, because of all of that it probably has to be fair. Otherwise, I think it could be very bad.
So can you think of a time, or any of us think of a time, where we expected fairness and it's completely unwarranted? It's just like there's no realistic expectation of fairness. One I'm thinking of is like the recent Los Angeles fires. Like, why is it fair that one person's house burned to the ground, or the house next door is completely untouched? Things that are like,
I don't think that happened. I think those fires burned everybody's houses down. So
no, there was examples. I'm using a realistic example of just
like a tornado that hits one house and then skips a house and goes to the next house. Yeah, that would make me crazy.
Just things that are completely outside of your control to a certain degree and outside of everyone else's control.
Everybody's control. Yeah, absolutely.
It feels like sometimes people expect, and I'm using extreme examples, but they expect fairness. It is unfair that this happened to me, or something needs to happen to make this fair. I don't really know how to address that with the client.
Even like, like in those traps, like sicknesses, people get
sickness.
sick, and sometimes like they go, it's not fair, but sometimes we just get like their thing, like
Yeah.
I've known plenty of 20-year-olds that have gotten cancer and should have not, like, there's no fairness to it. It just happened, and that sucks. And
right. So maybe in at least as far as I'm thinking, I would try to dig for, okay, so that seems unfair. And like, what else is there? Because to me, if they're stuck on it's unfair, well, what is it being unfair meaning to them?
Yeah. Tell me more about,
or what does that unfairness mean in relation to whatever it is you want to work on, and what goals you have for the future. Maybe not big stuff, tragedy, horrible stuff. Maybe that's better to talk with a therapist, but just small things where it's like, this is a roadblock in my goal and this is unfair.
How is this feeling? How is this feeling of unfairness serving you? Right? Yeah. Like, I had my knee replaced at 24, and there are plenty of ways it has inhibited my movement, and I've had to change things. There are times I've been in tears over it. Like, I get sad because I'm like, why can't I wish I could just move like everybody else, but that's also not fair for me to say, because a lot of other people have their own things they're dealing with, and I just may not know what they are. But how is this feeling of, I know that it's not serving me to hold on to that feeling of unfairness, right? It is not ultimately going to benefit me in any way. What's going to benefit me is to figure out how to do what I want to do with the knee replacement I have. Me wallowing in unfairness is not going to help me do that. So I think a client that is stuck in a space of feeling like something is unfair is victim thought. That's victim think. And I think it's very important for us as coaches to question those thought processes, because it is inhibiting them from momentum. It is inhibiting them from moving forward, from finding whatever closure they need to find so that they can achieve their goals.
Right. So go ahead, Lisa.
Another example would be, you're up for a promotion and you're up against somebody else who maybe is newer to the company, and they get the promotion and you didn't, and you put in your time. A lot of people are really
like, a lot of, that's not fair. I was here longer. Well, there's probably a reason why, whatever,
or it really actually is unfair. There was some sort of potentially discriminatory thing that happened. I mean, that happens. So
just maybe it's just a question of, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. I think that we can't
say it like tauntingly, like, what are you going to actually do about it?
Because truthfully, a client that is stuck in a space of unfair is stuck in the past. And we have to move them out of that space, or again, it becomes a therapy type situation. They have to be willing to move out of it.
Yeah, we're not moving them. I just.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They have to be willing to move out of it.
Yeah.
And they might need to grieve. They might need to grieve the reality of something happened. It is truly unfair, and there's nothing that can be done.
Yeah.
They might need time.
What about I think it's kind of maybe the opposite of this way of thinking that's maybe equally unrealistic, is opportunities will just fall in my lap, or, everything will work out for itself.
And there's a lot of people who think like that, because that's connected to law of attraction, which is connected to manifestation. So that is actually something that I hear quite frequently.
And do you think it's realistic or unrealistic?
I don't think it matters what I think. It's their belief system. Yeah. And if that belief system makes them feel good and isn't getting in the way or causing harm, then who am I?
I'm gonna argue that it could get in the way and cause harm.
Yes, it can, but I also think, yes, there is a fine line. But I also think that those people who are thinking that way tend to be extraordinarily, won't say tend, but a lot of them will also be, that thought process keeps them resilient. because they are gonna, it may not happen, but they're gonna put something, it's meant to keep them resilient.
Right.
They're gonna keep trying and putting it out there. If it doesn't happen, well, I just got to keep trying and put it out there. So it's really kind of a tool to build resilience.
Maybe I needed to clarify. I was more so thinking of this in the way of like, it's my excuse to be passive, essentially.
Oh,
manifestation without work, essentially.
Yeah, like I don't need to work or overcome or like do crazy things. It's like everything happens for a reason. It'll all work out in the end, and I've got good karma. That's more of a belief thing, but it feels like it's unrealistic to believe that everything will work out without your active input in the situation or the goal that you want.
Well, then why did they hire you?
Yeah,
if they believe that and they want to be passive and just receive all
maybe to co-sign their BS or maybe clarify the goal that they want. But I'm talking like they're not taking action then to achieve the goal. They're just like, well, like I know I kind of want this. I haven't been doing the stuff in between, but I have faith that everything will work out.
Well, that's like, I mean, what you're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater with some of the stuff, in the sense that, like, if we're coaching and we're coaching in a coaching structure, we have to set a session goal. And so we're going to be working in that session goal. They can't like be like, I set a session goal, it's just gonna happen, I'm not gonna work. So like what
I mean, but we also talked about like most of the coaching
in that space.
We talked about most of the coaching happens outside of the coaching session.
Yes,
I'm sure some clients are like, well, I coached for an hour this week, so like I'm sure I'll be fine.
Well, we're throwing out our competencies that tell us to have the account for accountability, for time frames. All of those things fall into us as coaches are what we have to ask into before the session's over. We have to ask into accountability. We have to ask into time frames. We have to ask into when these things are going to happen. That is set in ICF structure to help prevent that from happening, right? I mean, now the client can throw it all out the door as soon as they leave and blow it all off. But when they come back to us a week later, 2 weeks later, if they do, I've certainly had clients not come back out of guilt. I absolutely can think of at least one that I know for a fact did not come back because they just threw away the goals and didn't want to deal with it. And I was like, okay, well, it's fine. But they can do that. But then they're going to come back a week later, and we do have a check-in moment with them. That check-in moment happens with us as coaches. How did it go? What's going on? What happened over the last week? Catch me up. We have that little bit of exploration that we need to do with them, and learn how that went and ask around it. The client can tell us, I'm not into that goal anymore. I'd like to shift to this. And we are allowed to, or we as coaches, I think, should accept that if that is what our client tells us.
Not go to, but you said.
Right.
Yes.
And though I wonder, do we just accept whatever they say at face value? I lean towards no. I typically am going to ask a little bit more of a detailed, oriented, depth question. I don't just, I'm changing my goal. Okay, great. No, let me get a little further into that, and so I can understand what's going on, so you can hear yourself say that, because then you can understand what's going on.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely like moving more towards PCC coaching in that space too, where Jen's going to listen in, ask more, and then dig deeper into what that client is feeling about changing the goal, and asking. There'll probably be opportunity to listen and figure out what's really happening.
Right.
But we're also not going to tell them you have to or force them in a direction, because we feel like that's the way they should go, or that is, we have to be flexible as well, but flexible with exploration and curiosity.
Yeah.
Next form of maybe unrealistic expectation. Everyone should like me or should agree with me.
Of course you should.
Everyone ought to. How about that? Everyone ought to like me. And if they don't, they're assholes or they're just wrong.
I mean,
this is just more of like a personality trait.
It is, yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
But it's I mean, I've known people in my life who are like, I can't believe so and so doesn't like me. Like, why don't they like me? I'm a cool person.
So I think there's a big difference between like that, because right now that I mean, there's a bit saying everyone ought to like me. That can to me just feel like I like myself. I've got some good self-esteem going, right? Like that. There's one thing like where man. People like me, like, you know, like that to me feels like self-esteem. But when where you shifted it, Anthony, was why doesn't so-and-so like me? They should really like, you know, why, that is a totally different, coming from that's a totally different energy to me than people ought to like me.
Would you say it's unrealistic?
I mean, I think it might be a waste of your time. I don't know if it's unrealistic, but it might be a waste of your time, if that makes sense.
Hey, Sue.
Jerome, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's unrealistic to believe that, but there are people out there that believe that, and that probably kind of coincides with narcissism a bit.
Yeah.
So
I would think so.
How much you do, but I mean, I think, but I'm not going to say I'm not going to say with what Anthony said, that is not narcissistic for us to have somebody that doesn't like us and go home and wonder why, right? Like that is a very common thing for people to do. Every single one of us in this room, don't lie right now, has had that moment where we had an we find out somebody doesn't like us for one reason or another, and we're like, or maybe we don't even know the reason, and we're like, why? Or maybe we just interpret somebody's body language as them not liking us, and then we go home and wonder about ourselves. That is a very normal thing to do.
To demand that they should, though, is
to demand that they should is where we're going to get to a lot of insecurity, a big waste of your time, a lot of waste of time and energy, and then when it's like, no, I'm somebody special, I was meant, that's very
for some reason I'm thinking of the Family Guy episode where Brian learns that Quagmire does not like him. That's the thing. Quagmire lists all the reasons why Brian sucks as a person, and Brian is still just like, I can't understand why you don't like him. If you don't watch Family Guy,
I've not seen that episode. That sounds hilarious.
It's very funny.
It's hilarious.
Do we have final thoughts? I realize that the time in the corner is a little bit different from what the actual time is. So we'll start a little bit later. So there's other types of unrealistic expectations. Check out our blog on this in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I don't know. Do we have final thoughts, though, on unrealistic clients?
Yes, I think dig deeper, explore with the client before you judge it. Because it might be something completely different than whatever the goal is. So this, one of the research things that I watched, it was the person wants to be a rapper and a basketball star, and he wants to move his mom out of her house where she lives. And when you dug deeper into that, it's because he wants to live in purpose, because he believes that's his purpose. And so then it turns into, well, you know, what would be different in your life if you were doing what you needed to do to even start to try to achieve those things? And then it turns out like he needs to do better in school. He needs to eat better. He needs to go to sleep on time. He needs to exercise. It's a whole transformation that he's actually seeking. And it's not necessarily about the actual outcome. It's about who he becomes in the process. So I think that exploration is important before layering any judgment on top of it.
Love that. Well said. I think everything Jen said, and then the other piece is just be very aware in the moment that we feel like something is unrealistic. We have to first acknowledge that we are applying our judgment. Like, so that is a judgment and a bias that we are bringing to the table. So just have a tremendous amount of awareness when you have this thought process about, and now, of course, when we're speaking into goals, there are things that can be very unrealistic when you talk about what coaching is and what coaching isn't. And that, I think, we can be very clear and judgmental in that space. This is what coaching is. This is what it isn't. Boom. That is where we can be very clear and judgmental. I think that anytime, as soon as we get into that coaching, though, we have to be very aware and conscious of our biases and our judgments, and be willing to choose curiosity, the curiosity Jen brought to the table, before siding with our judgment of unrealistic. I think that is very critical. When that judgment pops in your head, switch it from oh, okay, I feel this way. That's a me feeling. That's about me. And switch to, let me learn more about my client.
Jerome, final thoughts, or Lisa?
I was gonna build off of the two ladies, and I agree completely with all that you've said. I think curious is really important, and not attached to the outcome for sure, but not even attached to the word choices, especially that they start with, because your clients will grow in their depth of sharing with you. And like Jen was mentioning and Brooke was mentioning, you can go a whole different direction than what they actually stated. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you three covered it up perfectly. I think maybe one thing that I didn't necessarily hear is we're all humans. So I think at a certain point or another, we're going to be unrealistic, whether it's too high or low about a certain thing. I think it's just important as a coach is to, again, remain curious so that you can lay all the options out on the table for them, so they potentially can move in a direction that does ultimately end up benefiting them.
On a somewhat philosophical and practical level, I don't really believe that there's one single objective reality. And every person, coach and client, have their own versions of reality that they're walking around in their head with. And you have to decide with a coach, like, what kind of Venn diagram can you work with? If your Venn diagram's overlapping and maybe you've got some judgment on their reality, you can suspend it. But there's a certain point where the Venn diagram is no longer a Venn diagram, and you have to accurately judge, can you coach this person without bias? And can you serve them and what their needs are? So being mindful of that might be a good idea when you're thinking about unrealistic goals your client might have. That's it. We will see you guys next week. We will talk about some other form of
More
client.
on clients next week.
Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment. And if you want a realistic idea of how to coach clients and be a life coach, take our classes. Take Coaching 101 and 102. And you can earn your life coach certification in a realistic time frame of just 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay, see you guys next week.